Hey guys, tonight we are diving into the world of ancient Greek myths, a realm usually bursting with drama, powerful gods, epic heroes, and let's be honest, a truly astonishing amount of divine activity. You might picture Mount Olympus shimmering, Zeus on his throne, thunderbolts crackling, while down below, a whirlwind of affairs is creating monsters, heroes, and all sorts of divine and semi-divine beings. It's the kind of story that feels electrifying, packed with passion, jealousy, and earth-shaking consequences. You probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes trying to keep up with the sheer volume of Zeus's romantic entanglements, or the subsequent genealogical chaos without needing a very strong cup of celestial coffee, and possibly a celestial abacus. Tonight, though, we're going to look at all that divine energy from a different angle. We're going to explore why managing Zeus's ever-growing, incredibly complicated family tree was perhaps one of the most tedious, bureaucratic, and ultimately might boring tasks in Greek mythology. Yes, prepare to feel the gentle, soporific weight of divine administration. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like sharing, let me know in the comments where you're winding down from tonight and what time it is there. It's always cool to see where these sleepy histories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. When you think of Zeus, king of the gods, you probably picture him wielding lightning bolts, sitting in judgment, or perhaps engaging in one of his numerous extramarital activities. These stories are usually told with flair, focusing on the drama, the seduction, the wrath of Hera, and the remarkable offspring that resulted. But step back from the thrilling narratives for a moment and consider the sheer logistics of it all. Imagine being in charge of keeping track of a family tree that sprouted branches like a rapidly multiplying, divinely enhanced vine. It wasn't just a few children here and there. Zeus had relationships with goddesses, nymphs, mortals, and even some rather unique entities, resulting in a pantheon of diverse descendants, ranging from major gods and heroes to obscure local spirits. The sheer administrative burden must have been staggering. Forget celestial thunderbolts for a moment and picture celestial paperwork. Every new relationship, every potential offspring, added another entry into a cosmic ledger that someone, somewhere perhaps a very patient, very overworked minor deity of record-keeping had to maintain. Was there a system, a divine database, or was it just a chaotic pile of inscribed tablets? It's hard to imagine the king of the cosmos having a perfectly organized filing system, which only adds to the potential for administrative chaos. A truly boring thought. One mainstream historical fact related to this complexity, though not directly about Zeus's personal administration, is that ancient Greek genealogies were incredibly important. People trace their lineage back through generations, often claiming descent from heroes and through them, from the gods themselves, including Zeus. This shows a cultural preoccupation with lineage and connection, making the idea of tracking all these divine human links a very real for them and complex task, even if performed by mortals claiming divine ancestry rather than the gods themselves. The desire to track these lines highlights the inherent complexity of the divine family tree. Consider the conversations. Right, so you say your great-great-grandmother was fathered by Zeus when he appeared as a swan, and her mother was Leda. Yes, got that. And that was the same Leda who was also the mother of Helen and Clytemnestra. Fascinating. So, does that make you, related to the Spartans? Hold on. Let me just update this scroll. It sounds like a never-ending, slightly confusing family reunion. Doesn't it? Just trying to piece together the connections could make your head spin? A quirky tidbit that hints at the administrative headaches is the sheer number of local myths and variations. Different regions and city-states in ancient Greece had their own stories, their own local heroes, many of whom claimed Zeus as an ancestor through some regional nymph or princess. This meant the official Olympian family tree was constantly being added to, disputed, and complicated by countless local branches. It wasn't a single, neat tree. It was a sprawling, interconnected, often contradictory forest of relationships. Trying to reconcile all those local claims into one coherent narrative sounds like a data entry job from Hades. Historians still argue whether the numerous myths about Zeus's affairs were attempts to explain the parentage of local heroes and rulers after their cults were established. Effectively grafting existing stories onto the Olympian family tree, rather than always being original narratives about Zeus's actions. Was it history driving the myth, or myth explaining history? This scholarly debate itself points to the complex, perhaps retroactive way this family tree was constructed, adding another layer of dry academic complexity to the picture. So, as you begin to see the sheer volume, the potential for confusion, and the underlying administrative reality of Zeus's prolificacy, let go of the dramatic imagery. Embrace the boring truth of managing a vast, complex, and ever-growing family tree. It wasn't just passion, it was logistics. And focusing on those logistics, that tedious record-keeping, that never-ending effort to keep track of who was who, it's the perfect, gentle mental exercise to help you drift. No need for thunderbolts tonight, just the quiet rustle of celestial parchment. You're just starting to grasp the sheer scale of Zeus's extended family. Now, let's bring in the figure who is perhaps most associated with Zeus's extramarital activities. His wife. Hera. While myths often portray her wrath in dramatic, terrifying ways, sending serpents, driving people mad, stirring up storms. Consider the process of her opposition. It wasn't just bursts of divine anger, it was a constant, tiresome, and utterly draining exercise in surveillance and monitoring. From a certain perspective, Hera's role was that of a cosmic auditor, perpetually checking Zeus's activities and dealing with the resulting irregularities. Imagine Hera's daily routine. It wasn't presiding serenely over marriage and childbirth all the time. A significant portion of her divine energy must have been dedicated to keeping tabs on her notoriously unfaithful husband. This required constant vigilance. Was he leaving Olympus? Who was he talking to? What form was he taking every cloud on the horizon? Every rustle in the trees? Every new arrival on Earth or in the divine realms could potentially be Zeus up to his old tricks. This level of constant suspicion and monitoring sounds utterly exhausting and, frankly, incredibly boring to maintain over centuries. Think about the techniques she might have used: spying through clouds, eavesdropping on divine gossip, dispatching minor deities or loyal followers to act as informants. Each method requires effort, attention to detail, and the ability to process potentially misleading or incomplete information. It's less like dramatic confrontation and more like being perpetually stuck in a celestial detective novel where the plot is always the same. And the ending is tragically predictable. Zeus gets away with it, again. A mainstream historical fact about Hera is that she was the goddess of marriage and family. This central aspect of her domain makes Zeus's infidelity a direct affront to her divine portfolio, yet explaining why she would be so consistently opposed. Her actions weren't just personal jealousy, they were a defense of the very institution she embodied. This adds a layer of cosmic bureaucracy to her wrath. She was upholding divine law, in a sense, even if her methods were dramatic. Consider the sheer volume of her reactions. She didn't just get angry once or twice, she reacted, plotted, and intervened every single time, or at least every time the myths record. This level of sustained opposition over countless affairs means her wrath wasn't a sudden explosion, but a chronic, low-grade or sometimes high-grade granted state of irritation, and a continuous effort to disrupt Zeus's plans and make life difficult for his paramours and offspring. That level of sustained administrative annoyance must have been incredibly draining. A quirky tidbit that shows the almost administrative nature of her surveillance is the myth of Argus Panoptes, the hundred-eyed giant. Hera tasked him with guarding Io, one of Zeus's lovers. A creature literally covered in eyes is the ultimate symbol of constant, unblinking surveillance. While a dramatic figure and his purpose was pure monitoring, imagine managing that employee's schedule, ensuring he didn't fall asleep with all his eyes at once. Another administrative headache for Hera. Historians still argue about whether Hera's portrayal primarily reflects patriarchal anxieties about female power and jealousy in ancient Greek society, or if she genuinely represented a divine force upholding societal norms of marriage against the chaotic power of the king of the gods. This debate highlights that her character served complex cultural functions. But within the narrative, her role as the constant check on Zeus's activities feels less like thrilling mythology and more like an eternal game of divine cat and mouse, where both participants are probably quite bored with the predictability of it all after the first few centuries. So, as you picture Hera, let go of the image of a goddess consumed purely by dramatic rage. See her instead as the tireless, perhaps exasperated, head of a cosmic compliance department, constantly auditing Zeus's activities and filing complaints. Her efforts were essential to many myths, but the underlying function, monitoring and reacting to the same pattern, is surprisingly monotonous. That steady, unending vigilance of Hera, it's a quiet kind of energy, the perfect backdrop for your own energy to subside. Just that constant, low hum of divine oversight, guiding you gently towards sleep. So you've got Zeus, the prolific father, and Hera, the tireless monitor. Now consider the actual outcome of their interactions, or Zeus's actions, despite Hera, a truly staggering number of offspring. The myths list gods, demigods, heroes, nymphs, kings, and the founders of countless cities and lineages, all fathered by Zeus with a bewildering array of partners. Keeping track of who was who their mother was, where they lived, and what their particular story or divine connection entailed must have been an administrative nightmare of epic, truly boring proportions. Imagine trying to build a database of all of Zeus's known children. You'd need columns for name, mother's species goddess, nymph, mortal. Other circumstances of conception, swan shower of gold cloud, notable deeds, associated city or region, divine status, Olympian minor deity mortal hero, and perhaps a field for Hera's reaction level. The sheer volume of data entry alone would be enough to make even a minor deity request a transfer to the underworld. Consider the effort involved in simply remembering all of them. Even for an immortal mind, the list is incredibly long and spans millennia. Was there a divine filing system? Scrolls upon scrolls, perhaps stored in some dusty archive on Mount Olympus? Or did Zeus simply rely on others to keep track? Either way, the process of recording, storing, and potentially retrieving information about each child feels less like exciting mythology and more like managing a celestial customer relationship management (CRM) system with a truly unwieldy number of contacts. A mainstream historical fact relevant here is the importance of oral tradition in transmitting myths. Before widespread literacy, stories, including genealogies, were passed down through generations by storytellers. While this allowed for flexibility and adaptation, hence the quirky tidbits about local variations, it also made maintaining a single, consistent, comprehensive record impossible. The master list of Zeus's children existed more as a collective, fluid body of stories than a fixed document, adding another layer of complexity and potential confusion for anyone trying to get a definitive count. Think about the potential for errors or omissions. Did Zeus ever forget about a child? Did a local hero's claim to divine parentage get accidentally overlooked? Was there a celestial audit process to ensure accuracy? Right, check my list. Zeus, son of Cronus and Rhea, married to Hera. Children with Hera Ares, Hephaestus, Hebe. Children not with Hera. Deep breath. Athena sprang from his head. Easy enough. Apollo, Artemis with Leto, got it. Hermes with Maia, Dionysus with Semele, twice, long story nigh. And then there's Heracles with Alcmene, Perseus with Danae, Minos with Europa, and the list goes on. And on. And on. Just reading the names is starting to feel a bit like memorizing a very long list for a test, isn't it? A quirky tidbit that highlights the administrative challenge is the concept of collective groups fathered by Zeus. Like the Muses with Mnemosyne or the Horai with Themis, instead of just individual children, he fathered entire sets of divine beings. This means you don't just add one name to the list, you add a whole group, each with their own domain and significance. It's like getting a bulk order of divine offspring. Great for populating the cosmos, maybe less great for the celestial census taker. Historians still argue about the total number of Zeus's children mentioned in ancient sources. Because of the local variations, different myths, and varying levels of detail, arriving at a definitive count is impossible. Estimates range from dozens to over 100 significant offspring, plus countless minor figures. This scholarly inability to get a firm number just reinforces how sprawling and unmanageable the family tree truly was. It's the ultimate some data may be missing scenario. So, as you contemplate the vast, disorganized, and ever-expanding list of Zeus's progeny, let go of the individual heroic tales for a moment. Focus instead on the sheer volume, the repetitive nature of the entries, the headache of categorization. It's a cosmic database that's perpetually out of date, full of inconsistencies and omissions. And that feeling of overwhelming, slightly chaotic data management, it's a surprisingly dull thought, perfect for calming a busy mind. Just the gentle hum of celestial servers trying to keep up. Trying and failing. Sleepily. Managing a sprawling family tree is one thing, but a significant part of Zeus's method for acquiring new branches involved a considerable amount of effort dedicated to disguise. The myths are full of instances where Zeus transforms himself into various forms, animals, objects, even other people to approach his intended paramours. While the idea of shape-shifting sounds exciting and magical, consider the sheer, repetitive, and potentially tedious process from Zeus's perspective. Each disguise required a decision. What form would be most effective for this particular target? A swan for Leda, a bull for Europa, a shower of gold for Danae, a mortal general for Alcmena. This wasn't just a spontaneous whim, presumably. It involved some level of thought or planning, however minimal, and then the actual transformation. Was it instant and effortless every time, or did it require focus, concentration, perhaps even a slight celestial headache as his divine form rearranged itself? Imagine the practice involved. Did Zeus perfect his swan impersonation through trial and error? Did he ever accidentally turn into the wrong animal? Yes, I meant to be a majestic eagle, soaring down. Oh dear, I seem to be a slightly confused-looking pigeon. This wasn't in the plan. The potential for awkwardness and missteps adds a layer of relatable, and therefore slightly mundane, difficulty to the divine transformation process. A mainstream historical fact is that shapeshifting is a common motif across many mythologies, often used by gods or magical beings to interact with the mortal world or deceive others. In Greek myth, it wasn't exclusive to Zeus, but he certainly was the most prolific practitioner when it came to his romantic pursuits. This widespread presence of the motif suggests it was a recognized, if fantastical, concept, but doesn't necessarily mean it was effortless for the divine practitioner. Think about the practicalities of maintaining a disguise. You couldn't just transform and then immediately engage in conversation about astrophysics. You had to act the part. If you were a bull, you had to behave like a bull, presumably a charming, divinely infused bull. But still, if you were a shower of gold, you had to, well, shower goldenly. This required sustained effort and attention to detail to avoid breaking character and ruining the deception. That level of constant performance sounds tiring. A quirky tidbit related to this is the idea that some of his disguises were less than glamorous. While a swan or a bull might have a certain mystique, appearing as an ant to approach Medusa sounds significantly less impressive and perhaps a bit undignified for the king of the gods. Imagine the conversation, so, how did you two meet? Oh, he appeared as an ant. It adds a layer of the slightly absurd and mundane to the divine seduction process. Historians still argue whether the variety of Zeus's forms was purely narrative invention to make each story unique, or if it reflects earlier, more localized animal or nature deities whose myths were later absorbed into the Zeus cult. Was the swan disguise always just a story about Zeus? Or did it originate from a local myth about a swan god that later got attributed to Zeus? This debate highlights the potential for these dramatic transformations to have roots in older, perhaps less glamorous, mythological traditions. So, as you picture Zeus transforming, move past the magic for a moment. Think about the mental effort, the potential for awkwardness, the repetitive nature of changing forms for the same basic purpose, over and over again. It was a tool in his extensive toolkit, a means to an end, and like any tool used repeatedly, its use likely became routine, predictable, and maybe even a little bit tedious. That steady effort of transformation, it's a quiet kind of divine labor, perfectly suited for helping your own consciousness settle down. Just the thought of shifting forms, shifting, shifting, sleepily. So Zeus has picked his disguise, perhaps endured the slight headache of transforming, and successfully approached his intended. But unless the paramour happened to be conveniently located just outside his palace on Mount Olympus, which, let's be honest, wasn't usually the case, especially with mortal women, this whole endeavor required travel. And travel in ancient Greece, even for a god, wasn't exactly instantaneous teleportation all the time. Consider the potentially boring reality of getting from point A, Mount Olympus, or wherever Zeus happened to be, to point B, wherever the object of his affection resided. Myths sometimes describe Zeus traveling by chariot drawn by divine horses, soaring through the sky. While visually impressive, this is still a journey. It takes time. Other myths imply him simply appearing, but even divine omnipresence or near instantaneous travel might involve a process, a focus, a mental shift to a new location. It wasn't just clicking your fingers, it required intent and the application of divine power, which, like any repeated action, could become routine. Think about the destinations. Ancient Greece was dotted with cities, islands, mountains, and remote valleys. Many of Zeus's paramours lived in these diverse locations, traveling to Argos or Sparta or Crete, or a secluded spot in Arcadia required covering significant distances, either across land, sea, or sky. Even on a divine chariot, the landscape below would eventually become familiar. The same mountains, the same seas, the same tiny mortal settlements blurring beneath. The novelty would surely wear off after the first few dozen trips. A mainstream historical fact relevant here is that travel in ancient Greece was indeed difficult and time-consuming for mortals. Journeys by land were slow and arduous, often facing challenging terrain and limited infrastructure. Sea travel was dependent on winds and weather and could be perilous. The myths grant gods easier travel, but the very idea of them traveling implies traversing real-world geography, connecting their stories to the physical landscape of Greece. Consider the sheer number of journeys Zeus must have undertaken over the centuries for his various liaisons, to Crete for Europa, to Thebes for Semele and Alcmene, to Argos for Danae, to Sparta for Leda, and countless others. Each trip, even if quick by divine standards, was a distinct event, requiring focus, energy, and navigating from one place to another. That's a lot of celestial mileage racking up. A quirky tidbit is that some myths describe Zeus transforming during the journey, or arriving already in disguise at the destination. This adds a layer of multitasking to his travel, not just getting there, but maintaining a specific form or appearance while en route. Imagine flying as an eagle but constantly having to make sure you look sufficiently eagle-like and not accidentally revert back to your divine form mid-flight. Just another small, potentially irritating detail in the divine travel plan. Historians still argue about the extent to which the geographical locations mentioned in the myths reflected actual pilgrimage routes or trade networks in ancient Greece. Were certain myths placed in specific locations to explain the origins of local cults, or to add legitimacy to ruling families who claimed descent from Zeus in those areas? This debate highlights how the travel in myths is often tied to real-world geography and human history, grounding the divine journeys in a less fantastical, more historically connected reality. So, as you picture Zeus on his way to another rendezvous, move beyond the drama of the meeting itself. Think about the commute, the repetitive act of traversing distance, however quickly, to reach yet another destination for yet another liaison. It's the divine equivalent of a frequent flyer program. But without the perks, that steady, repetitive travel, it's a gentle, monotonous rhythm, perfect for helping your own mind settle down and drift. Just the quiet sound of distance being covered. Steadily, sleepily. Let's focus specifically now on Zeus's relationships with mortal women. While his liaisons with goddesses and nymphs came with their own divine complexities, mortal partners introduced a unique set of, frankly, tedious inconveniences that a god of the cosmos had to manage. These relationships weren't immortal to immortal affairs. They involved beings with vastly different lifespans and limitations. The most obvious inconvenience was the limited time frame. Mortal lives are fleeting compared to immortal ones. A relationship with a mortal woman, no matter how intense in the moment, was inherently temporary. This meant a constant cycle of meeting new partners, engaging in a brief period of relationship by divine standards, and then they would age and die. For a god, this must have added a layer of melancholy. Yes, but also a persistent need to find new partners, a never-ending recruitment drive, if you will. Consider the effort required to explain things, or more likely, not explain things. To a mortal woman, how do you casually mention you're the king of the gods? How do you explain why you keep disappearing? How do you manage expectations when your existence spans millennia, and hers is merely decades? The logistical and emotional disconnect must have been significant, adding a layer of awkwardness and necessary deception to each interaction. A mainstream historical fact is that in ancient Greek myths, the interaction between gods and mortals was a frequent theme, often resulting in the birth of heroes and the intervention of divine power in human affairs. The distinction between immortal and mortal realms was fundamental to their worldview, making the relationships between beings of these different natures inherently complex and often fraught with difficulty for the mortal involved. Usually, think about the follow-up. If a child resulted from the union, which was frequently the case, being the point of many such myths, Zeus couldn't exactly be a constant, present father figure in the mortal world. His involvement was often limited to ensuring the child's survival, perhaps offering occasional divine assistance, or setting them on their heroic path. This meant dealing with the mortal mother or whoever raised the child from a distance, likely requiring intermittent check-ins or interventions, adding ongoing, perhaps tedious, responsibilities without the benefit of daily co-parenting. A quirky tidbit that highlights the inconvenience is the story of Semele. She insisted on seeing Zeus in his true divine form, something mortals cannot withstand. Zeus, bound by an oath, had to comply, resulting in her fiery demise. While dramatic, it illustrates the fundamental danger and incompatibility of the divine and mortal realms interacting too closely. It's the ultimate relationship complication. Your very essence is lethal to your partner. Makes managing disagreements over dinner seem simple, doesn't it? Historians still argue whether the myths of gods coupling with mortals served primarily to elevate the status of human heroes and lineages by giving them divine ancestry, or if they also reflect genuine ancient beliefs in the permeability of the divine and human worlds. This debate highlights the cultural function of these stories. But within the narrative, the logistics of a timeless being engaging with a time-bound one remain a source of narrative complexity and, from our boring perspective, practical headaches for Zeus. So, as you picture Zeus's interactions with mortal women, move past the romanticized versions. See the underlying practical difficulties, the briefness of the relationship, the need for deception, the long-distance parenting. It adds a layer of logistical effort and perhaps even a quiet sadness to the divine experience. That repetitive cycle of temporary connections and ongoing distant responsibilities, it's a surprisingly calm, almost melancholic thought, perfect for easing your mind towards rest. The quiet passage of mortal time, unnoticed by the god, yet requiring his intermittent attention. Sleepily. Following on from the challenges of mortal relationships, let's consider the very different kinds of offspring Zeus fathered divine children, gods, goddesses, nymphs, and mortal demigod children, heroes, kings, founders. Each category came with its own distinct set of responsibilities, expectations, and potential headaches for the Divine Father. This wasn't a one-size-fits-all parenting gig. It required juggling very different developmental paths and dealing with vastly different problems. Divine children, like Apollo, Artemis, Hermes, or Athena, though she sprang from his head, Adding another unique administrative note, were immortals. They quickly grew to maturity or were born fully formed, in some cases, and took on their own domains and responsibilities within the cosmos. While this meant they were generally self-sufficient relatively quickly, they also became powerful entities with their own wills, rivalries sometimes with each other or with Hera, and divine dramas that Zeus had to navigate. Imagine mediating disputes between immortal siblings with cosmic powers. Apollo, please stop turning people into trees just because Artemis got more worshippers this month. And Artemis, maybe don't turn his temple into a swamp. Can't you two just get along? Sounds like divine family counseling, a truly tedious process. Mortal and demigod children, on the other hand, required a different kind of attention. They lived finite lives, faced mortal dangers, monsters, wars, angry gods, and often needed divine intervention or guidance to fulfill their destinies. Zeus might have to subtly or not so subtly influence events in the mortal world to help his heroic offspring, send aid, or even argue their case with other gods. This involved constant monitoring of the mortal realm, which, while perhaps interesting at times, also sounds like a never-ending series of crises that needed managing from afar. Oh great, Heracles is fighting another Lernaean Hydra. Just as I was about to relax, where did I put that extra lightning bolt? A mainstream historical fact here is the role of heroes as intermediaries between the divine and human realms in Greek mythology. They often received help from their divine parents or patrons, and their deeds had significant consequences for the mortal world. This structural element of the myths highlights the fundamental difference in the lives and impacts of divine versus mortal offspring, requiring Zeus to interact with their lives in very different ways. Consider the different kinds of parenting involved. For divine children, it might be about guiding their roles, managing their integration into the Olympian family, and dealing with their divine squabbles. For mortal children, it was more about ensuring their survival, helping them overcome challenges, and maybe subtly influencing human history through their actions. Two vastly different job descriptions under the same Divine Father title. A quirky tidbit highlighting the different interactions is the myth of Zeus visiting Heracles' mother, Alcmene, for 3 consecutive nights by extending the darkness. This extraordinary act for a mortal child stands in stark contrast to his likely more distant interactions with his fully divine offspring once they were established on Olympus. It suggests mortal children, despite the temporary nature of the relationship with their mother, could sometimes command significant, albeit brief, divine attention. Historians still argue about whether the different characteristics and fates of Zeus's divine and mortal offspring reflect underlying distinctions in ancient Greek religious beliefs about the nature of divinity and the potential for human achievement. Were mortal heroes seen as a bridge to the divine, or were they fundamentally distinct and lesser beings? This debate touches on the theological implications of Zeus's dual fatherhood, but within the narrative, it just means twice the potential for different kinds of problems for the divine dad to sort out. So, as you think about Zeus as a father figure, move past the simple label. See the 2 distinct sets of challenges managing powerful, immortal beings with their own agendas versus guiding vulnerable, temporary mortals through perilous lives. It wasn't just parenting, it was celestial portfolio management, that division of labor, that need to switch between different modes of interaction. It's another layer of complexity that, paradoxically, makes the divine task feel more like mundane work. And the thought of that administrative juggling, it's a quiet, steady rhythm, perfect for helping your own mind find its quiet center. Sleepily, with an ever-growing family tree spanning gods, nymphs, and countless mortals across generations. One of the most basic, yet potentially most tedious challenges for Zeus must have been simply remembering everyone. We're talking about a truly astonishing number of names, faces both divine and mortal, in various forms, and lineages to keep straight. This wasn't just remembering your immediate family. This was remembering a cast of characters that populated the entire mythological landscape of ancient Greece. Imagine being at a large gathering, perhaps a rare assembly involving both divine and significant mortal descendants, and trying to recall who everyone is and how they're related. Ah, yes, you. You're the son of that nymph from Arcadia, the one I met while I was disguised as a bear. No, that was someone else. Were you the one born near the river Alpheus? Or was that your cousin? You have your mother's eyes. Maybe it's been a few centuries. Sounds like a never-ending, potentially embarrassing exercise in trying to remember distant relatives at a massive, sprawling family reunion. Keeping track of names alone would be a task. Divine names, mortal names, regional variations of names, epithets associated with heroes. The list is immense. Was there a divine mnemonic technique? Did he have cheat sheets, or did he just rely on the fact that most beings would be utterly intimidated and wouldn't dare point out if he mixed them up with someone else? A mainstream historical fact is that naming conventions in ancient Greece were complex and varied by region and time period. People often had a single name, sometimes with a patronymic son of so-and-so or an indication of their origin. Heroes and gods often had multiple epithets associated with them. This cultural context suggests that even for mortals, names and identities could be complicated, magnifying the challenge for a god trying to remember a vast number of beings from different eras and places. Consider the difficulty of remembering the circumstances of each birth. Right, you were the shower of gold one, and you the swan one, and you the eagle one, and you the regular human form one. Wait, which regular human form one were you? There were several. It adds another layer to the memory challenge, not just the person, but the specific, often unusual details of their origin story. A quirky tidbit that hints at the sheer volume is the fact that many minor local heroes and figures from obscure myths also claimed Zeus as a father. These weren't the headline names like Heracles or Perseus, but the founders of small towns or the figures in local legends, remembered only in their specific regions. They still added entries to the ever-growing list of Zeus's progeny. It's like having hundreds of third cousins twice removed that you've only met once at a very large, very long family picnic. Historians still argue about the processes by which local myths and genealogies were integrated into the wider, pan-Hellenic mythology centered on the Olympians. Were these local claims widely accepted, or were some seen as less legitimate? This debate points to the fluid and sometimes contested nature of these divine lineages, adding another layer of potential confusion to anyone. Even Zeus trying to create a definitive, universally agreed-upon family tree? So, as you picture Zeus trying to navigate this vast network of relationships, move past the image of a god who knows everything effortlessly. Imagine the quiet, internal struggle to recall a specific name, a particular face, or the details of a long-ago encounter. It's the divine version of realizing you've forgotten the name of someone you've met multiple times. That quiet, slightly embarrassing mental fumbling. It's a very human, very mundane thought, perfect for helping your own mind wind down. Just the gentle effort of trying to remember. Trying, and letting the names blur. Sleepily. Having established a complex and sprawling family, Zeus wasn't just done after the initial encounter or the birth of a child. Maintaining these relationships, particularly with his divine children and influential mortal descendants, often involved an ongoing requirement for gifts, favors, and interventions. This wasn't always dramatic divine aid. It was often a more mundane, persistent need to manage expectations and provide support, adding another layer of administrative tedium. Divine children expected their domains, their honors, and Zeus's backing in their own endeavors or disputes. This meant Zeus was constantly involved in Olympian politics, mediating between his children and siblings, granting boons, and ensuring they received proper worship from mortals. Imagine the endless stream of requests. Father, Ares is causing trouble in my temple again. Dad, I need some extra thunderbolts for my latest project. Can you please tell Poseidon to stop flooding my favorite island? It sounds like managing a very powerful, very demanding group of adult children. Mortal and demigod children, while not requiring daily upkeep, often needed significant divine assistance at crucial moments in their lives, particularly the heroes. Zeus might have to send Hermes with a message, offer guidance through a dream, subtly influence the outcome of a battle, or even pull them out of a sticky situation entirely. Each intervention required attention, a decision, and the application of divine power, tasks that, while sometimes dramatic in myth, were for Zeus likely part of the ongoing business of managing his mortal legacy. A mainstream historical fact is that in ancient Greek religion, votive offerings and prayers were made to the gods, including Zeus in exchange for favors, protection, or guidance. Mortals expected the gods to intervene in their lives, and divine parents, in particular, were seen as potential sources of aid for their descendants. This cultural practice reflects the mythological reality of gods providing support, highlighting the expectation of divine favor tied to these relationships. Consider the sheer volume of requests and necessary interventions over the centuries. It wasn't a one-time gift at birth. It was a continuous process of managing the needs and expectations of a vast network of descendants, both divine and mortal. Was there a divine inbox? A celestial queue of prayer requests and demands? The logistics of processing and responding to all of these must have been considerable. A quirky tidbit is that some myths show Zeus being surprisingly hands-on, but in a very specific, almost administrative way. For example, ensuring Perseus received the necessary tools to defeat Medusa, or subtly guiding Heracles through his labors. These weren't just random acts, they were targeted interventions to help his offspring succeed. It's like divine project management, ensuring key initiatives the hero's quests stay on track. Historians still argue about the extent to which the myths about divine intervention in heroic lives reflected genuine beliefs about the gods' active involvement in human affairs, or if they were primarily narrative devices to explain heroic success and reinforce the connection between divine and human power. This debate touches on the theological function of these stories. But within the narrative, Zeus's consistent role in aiding his offspring points to an ongoing, perhaps dutiful, responsibility. So, as you picture Zeus responding to requests and managing the needs of his vast family, move past the image of effortless divine power. See the underlying requirement for attention, decision-making, and continuous effort. It's the divine version of constantly writing letters of recommendation or providing financial assistance to your many, many children and grandchildren. That steady, repetitive act of giving aid and managing requests, it's a quiet, consistent rhythm, perfect for helping your mind find its peaceful center. Just the gentle flow of divine favors being dispensed sleepily. With relationships spanning different realms and involving countless partners, managing Zeus's schedule must have been a logistical nightmare. Avoiding overlapping encounters, ensuring he was in the right place in the right disguise at the right time, and juggling divine duties with his extensive personal life adds yet another layer of boring complexity to his existence. This wasn't just spontaneity, it required a degree of planning, however chaotic it might seem from the outside. Imagine trying to schedule encounters when you're the king of the gods, responsible for the sky, thunder, justice, and hosting divine assemblies, while also trying to meet up with a nymph by a particular river on Thursday, transform into a bull to appear before a princess on Friday, and somehow fit in a visit to a mortal queen sometime that week, all while avoiding your notoriously vigilant wife. It sounds utterly exhausting. Was there a divine calendar? Did he have reminders, or was it a constant juggling act, relying on divine intuition and hoping he didn't accidentally arrange to be two places at once or worse? Arrive as the wrong animal. Oh, blast, I'm supposed to be the eagle today for Aegina, but I'm still stuck in swan form from yesterday's Leda situation, and I think Hera is due back from visiting her mother any minute. The potential for mix-ups and near misses adds a touch of divine farce to the picture, highlighting the logistical challenge. A mainstream historical fact is that the ancient Greeks structured their time around natural cycles, day-night, seasons, religious festivals, and the needs of agriculture and society. While gods were outside of mortal time, the myths place their interactions within a temporal framework that is relatable. The idea of scheduling and being on time might not be the same for gods, but coordinating interactions across different locations and with beings who did experience linear time introduces scheduling considerations. Consider the sheer number of potential conflicts. A divine assembly on Olympus might clash with a planned rendezvous on Earth. One potential paramour might live near another, requiring extra caution to avoid being seen or having his disguise recognized. Each new relationship added another constraint to the divine schedule, making spontaneity increasingly difficult to manage. A quirky tidbit related to timing is the myth of Zeus extending the night to spend 3 consecutive nights with Alcmene, mother of Heracles. This divine manipulation of time highlights the lengths to which he might go for a particular liaison, but it also suggests that sometimes standard time wasn't sufficient for his plans, requiring extraordinary measures to avoid overlapping commitments or simply needing more time for a specific encounter. It's like having to pull an all-nighter, but on a cosmic scale, just to fit everything in. Historians still argue about the extent to which the specific timing or sequencing of events in myths held symbolic or astronomical significance. Were certain divine encounters linked to particular celestial alignments or points in the agricultural year? This debate suggests that there might have been underlying structures or meanings related to the timing of these events, adding a layer of complexity beyond simple narrative convenience, and perhaps making Zeus's scheduling even more tied to external factors. So, as you picture Zeus navigating his personal life, move beyond the idea of effortless divine freedom. See the constraints, the need for coordination, the potential for scheduling conflicts. It was the divine version of juggling multiple appointments and trying not to double book yourself. That quiet, ongoing effort of managing his time and presence, it's a very relatable, very mundane kind of problem, perfect for easing your mind into a state of calm. Just the thought of a celestial calendar filling up, sleepily, beyond just managing current relationships and children. Zeus's extensive family tree introduced another layer of administrative tedium, keeping track of prophecies and destinies associated with his numerous offspring. Many of his children, particularly the heroes, had significant fates foretold for them, involving great deeds, challenges, and interactions with other divine and mortal figures. Monitoring, understanding, and sometimes subtly influencing these prophecies must have been a continuous process of divine record-keeping and foresight. Imagine a celestial library filled with scrolls detailing the destinies of Zeus's descendants, each child's potential future, their fated encounters, the challenges they would face, the impact they would have on the world. All this information needed to be recorded and referenced. Was there a divine librarian of fate, a cosmic database searchable by lineage, or was it a disorganized collection of cryptic pronouncements? The logistics of managing this prophetic data sounds overwhelmingly boring. Consider the complexity. Prophecies weren't always straightforward. They could be ambiguous, layered, or depend on specific actions being taken. Interpreting them, seeing how different destinies might intertwine, especially when many heroes were related, and understanding the potential consequences of divine intervention required constant attention and analysis. It wasn't just reading a list, it was engaging in complex scenario planning based on incomplete information. A mainstream historical fact is that prophecy and oracles played a crucial role in ancient Greek religion and daily life. People consulted oracles for guidance on everything from personal decisions to matters of state. The belief in fate and destiny was a fundamental aspect of their worldview, and the gods were often seen as having knowledge of, or even influencing, these predetermined paths. This cultural context makes the idea of prophecies about divine offspring a natural extension of these beliefs, but also highlights the complexity inherent in interpreting fate. Think about the number of prophecies associated with just one of Zeus's famous sons. Like Heracles, his entire life was marked by destiny, from the circumstances of his birth to the labors he performed and his eventual apotheosis. Tracking the fulfillment of each prophetic element related to him, while also monitoring the prophecies for dozens of other descendants, would require immense focus and constant cross-referencing. A quirky tidbit is the myth that Zeus himself was subject to prophecies, particularly one that foretold a son who would overthrow him, just as he had overthrown his father Cronus. This prophecy influenced some of his choices of partners, leading him to swallow Metis. For example, this shows that even the king of the gods had to pay attention to fate, and the need to navigate his own destiny while also managing the destinies of his children adds a layer of recursive, headache-inducing complexity to the whole divine operation. It's like trying to manage multiple interlocking project timelines, one of which affects your own job security. Historians still argue about the extent to which myths about prophecy were seen as rigid, predetermined fates, or if they allowed for a degree of free will or divine intervention to alter outcomes. Was destiny a fixed script or a flexible guideline? This debate touches on fundamental philosophical questions, but within the narrative context, it means Zeus might have been constantly analyzing whether or not he could or should intervene to nudge a destiny in a certain direction, adding a layer of divine deliberation that sounds quite thoughtful and perhaps a bit tedious. So, as you picture Zeus contemplating the future of his vast progeny, move past the image of a god who sees all effortlessly. See the effort required to track the threads of fate, to interpret cryptic pronouncements, to understand the potential outcomes of countless lives unfolding according to destiny. It's the divine version of trying to predict market trends based on fragmented data, that quiet, ongoing process of analyzing fate. It's a very mental, very passive kind of activity, perfect for helping your own thoughts slow down and drift. Just the soft rustle of prophetic scrolls being consulted. Consulted. Sleepily. Having a vast and ever-expanding family tree that involves, let's call them non-traditional relationships, was bound to lead to some awkward social situations, particularly at family gatherings on Mount Olympus. While the myths often focus on the drama between Zeus, Hera, and the specific paramour or child, consider the broader picture having to introduce or acknowledge new divine and semi-divine relatives to the existing, often tightly knit, Olympian family. This wasn't just personal drama, it was a constant source of potential social friction and boringly uncomfortable conversations. Imagine a major feast or assembly on Olympus. Hera is there, obviously. Poseidon and Hades. Zeus's brothers are there, along with their consorts. His sisters Hestia and Demeter are present. And then there are his children with Hera Ares, Hephaestus. Hebe and his major divine children with other goddesses Apollo, Artemis, Hermes, Athena, Dionysus. Now, introduce a new divine child. Say, born from a union with a lesser-known nymph, or perhaps a particularly successful mortal hero who has been granted immortality and a place on Olympus, and whose divine parentage by Zeus is about to be formally acknowledged. The introductions must have been strained at times. Everyone, this is Arion, son of Poseidon and Demeter. Long story. Don't ask. Hebe, you remember. Ares is trying not to start a fight, and this is, Plutus, son of Demeter and I. Yes, Zeus fathered Plutus, god of wealth, with Demeter, his own sister. See awkward. Or imagine introducing a newly arrived, slightly overwhelmed mortal hero who is now a god, having to explain his lineage to the assembled, often judgmental divine family. Right. Yes, this is Asclepius, son of Apollo. But wait, Apollo's my son, so that makes Asclepius my grandson, and his mother was Coronis, a mortal. So, yes, my mortal grandson who is now a god. Welcome to the family. Try not to make eye contact with Hera. A mainstream historical fact is that family relationships, including sibling rivalries, marital strife, and parent-child dynamics, are core themes in the myths about the Olympian gods. The divine world mirrored aspects of human social structures, albeit on a cosmic scale and with supernatural powers. This focus on family dynamics means that awkward introductions and managing complex relationships were inherent parts of the mythological narrative. Consider the sheer number of relationships to explain and keep straight for everyone else on Olympus. It wasn't just Zeus's headache. The other gods also had to navigate this sprawling, interconnected web of kinship. Was there a divine HR department to handle the onboarding of new deities? Probably not. A quirky tidbit that highlights the potential for awkwardness is the story of Dionysus, son of Zeus and the mortal Semele. Because Semele died before Dionysus was born, thanks. Hera. Zeus stitched the infant Dionysus into his own thigh until he was ready to be born. Try explaining that origin story at the next family gathering. So, Uncle Dionysus, tell us again about how you were born from Dad's leg. It adds a unique, slightly bizarre layer to the already complicated family history. Historians still argue about the extent to which the portrayal of divine family dysfunction served as a cautionary tale for human behavior, or if it simply reflected a projection of human social complexities onto the divine realm. Did the myths about Olympian squabbles offer lessons on how not to behave? Or were they just entertaining stories about powerful beings acting like flawed humans? If this debate points to the moral and social functions of these narratives. But within the family context, it unequivocally highlights the potential for uncomfortable social interactions. So, as you picture the scene on Mount Olympus, move past the image of harmonious divine rule. See the underlying social awkwardness, the need for careful introductions, the knowing glances between deities who do know who everyone is. Even if Zeus momentarily forgets, it's the divine version of navigating a complex family reunion where half the attendees have complicated relationship histories with the host. That quiet social tension, that need to be on your best divine behavior, it's a surprisingly calming because it's so relatable in its awkwardness. Thought, perfect for easing your mind towards rest, just the quiet hum of strained divine conversation. Fading, fading, sleepily. Beyond just the awkward social introductions, Zeus's complex family life involved another layer of tedious administrative detail. The distinction between legitimate and illegitimate children and the different statuses and rights that came with each. In both human and divine terms in ancient Greece, the status of one's parents, particularly the mother's marital status, significantly impacted one's place in society and lineage. Applying these concepts to a divine, polygamous father added a layer of bureaucratic complexity. In ancient Greek society, legitimacy was crucial for matters of inheritance, citizenship, and social standing. Children born within a legal marriage had different rights than those born outside of it. While divine laws weren't identical to mortal ones, similar concepts of hierarchy and status applied. Children born to Zeus and his wife Hera were considered the primary, legitimate Olympian offspring, often holding specific, powerful domains from birthright. Children born to Zeus and other goddesses, like Apollo and Artemis with Leto or Hermes with Maia, were clearly divine and powerful. But their relationship to the core Olympian family might have been subtly different from those born of Zeus and Hera. While powerful deities in their own right, their status relative to the legitimate Olympian children could be a source of tension or distinction in myths. Then there were the children born to Zeus and mortal women. These were the heroes and kings, divine on their father's side but mortal through their mothers. Their status was distinct from both fully divine and fully mortal beings. They often had extraordinary abilities but were still subject to death. Their claim to divine parentage gave them prestige in the mortal world, but they weren't inherently part of the Olympian Council unless granted immortality. Like Heracles, a mainstream historical fact is that Athenian law, for instance, had strict rules regarding citizenship based on the legitimacy of birth to Athenian parents. This highlights the real-world importance of legitimate lineage in ancient Greece, providing a cultural context for why the distinction between children born within Zeus's marriage to Hera and those born outside of it would be a meaningful, if divinely complex, concept. Consider the paperwork, or celestial record-keeping, involved in categorizing all these different types of offspring. Was there a divine registry noting the mother's status for each child? Were different records kept for divine-born versus mortal-born descendants? The very act of making and maintaining these distinctions adds a layer of bureaucratic process to the divine family structure. A quirky tidbit illustrating the impact of this distinction is the story of Heracles, son of Zeus and the mortal Alcmene. Despite being Zeus's most famous and powerful heroic son, his mortal birth meant he was subject to Hera's intense persecution, in a way that fully divine children often were not. His journey to achieving divine status and a place on Olympus was long and arduous, directly contrasting with the inherent divine status of Zeus's children with goddesses. Historians still argue about the extent to which the myths about the different statuses of Zeus's children reflected actual social anxieties or power struggles in ancient Greek society regarding lineage and legitimacy. Did these myths serve to reinforce existing social hierarchies, Or did they explore the potential for status to be earned through deeds as with heroes rather than solely inherited? This debate points to the social and cultural messages embedded in these narratives. But within the story, the need to distinguish between different types of offspring introduces a layer of, yes, bureaucratic classification. So, as you contemplate the different categories of Zeus's children, the legitimate Olympians, the divine children from other unions, the mortal heroes, move past the individual stories of their deeds, see the underlying system of classification, the different statuses, the implicit rules governing their place in the cosmos. It's the divine version of sorting through complex legal documents related to inheritance and lineage. That quiet, analytical process of distinguishing status. It's a very dry, very intellectual activity, perfect for helping your mind disengage and drift. Just the thought of celestial filing cabinets, being organized, sleepily. As we near the end of our journey through the boring side of Zeus's family life, let's step back and consider the overarching pattern. Affair after affair, disguise after disguise, child after child. While each individual myth might have its dramatic elements, when you look at the totality of Zeus's romantic endeavors, a certain monotony begins to emerge. The sheer repetition of the pattern itself becomes, well, predictable, and therefore boring. Think about it from a narrative perspective. How many times can you hear a story about Zeus seeing an attractive female divine or mortal, deciding he wants to pursue her, coming up with a disguise, successfully usually seducing her, resulting in a child, and then dealing with Hera's predictable, albeit often dramatic, reaction? After the first dozen or so, the basic structure is clear. The details might change. Swan, bull, shower of gold. But the fundamental plot is the same. This isn't a thrilling series with unexpected plot twists in every episode. It's more like a very, very long procedural drama where the main character has one core repetitive behavior pattern that drives most of the subplots. You know the formula. You know the likely outcome: a child will be born. Hera will be angry. The lack of fundamental variation in Zeus's approach makes the overall narrative of his love life incredibly predictable and, therefore, boring in its repetition. A mainstream historical fact is that ancient Greek mythology often used recurring motifs and character archetypes. The powerful, often philandering, sky god is found in various Indo-European mythologies. The concept of divine mortal unions producing heroes is also a common theme. This use of established patterns across myths contributed to their cultural resonance, but also meant that individual stories often followed familiar structures, contributing to the sense of repetition when viewed collectively. Consider the viewpoint of the other gods on Olympus. After centuries, possibly millennia, of witnessing this same pattern unfold, their reactions, while sometimes dramatic, must also have become somewhat jaded or resigned. Oh, look, Zeus is leaving in a cloud again. Wonder who it is this time. And I suppose we should prepare for Hera's inevitable tantrum later. The divine neighbors are just watching the same old story play out. Over and over. A quirky tidbit that emphasizes the repetition is the sheer number of geographical locations associated with these myths. It wasn't just one region. Zeus's affairs spanned the entirety of the Greek world. This means the setting changed, but the story remained the same. He took his predictable pattern on a tour across the landscape. Right, done with Crete, off to Thebes for the next installment of the same narrative. Historians still argue about the extent to which the repetition in myths was a deliberate feature, meant to reinforce certain cultural values or understanding of the god's nature, or if it simply reflects the accumulation of similar stories from different times and places being attributed to the same central figure. Was the pattern intentional, or a byproduct of how myths evolved? This debate touches on the underlying structure of mythological storytelling, but the undeniable effect for a modern listener viewing the entirety of Zeus's affairs is one of considerable repetition. So, as you reflect on the vast collection of Zeus's romantic myths, move past the individual sparks of drama. See the underlying, consistent pattern. The same beginning, the same middle with a different disguise and partner, the same predictable outcome. It's the divine version of watching reruns of a show you've seen too many times, that quiet, steady, unchanging pattern, it's a very calming thought because there are no surprises left, just the predictable rhythm of divine routine, repeating, repeating, sleepily. We've reached the final section of our exploration into the unexpectedly boring world of Zeus's complex family tree. We've dissected the administrative burdens, the logistical headaches, the social awkwardness, the bureaucratic distinctions, and the sheer, mind-numbing repetition of his prolific romantic life. We've seen that beyond the thunderbolts and the dramatic encounters, there was a vast underlying reality of divine administration and predictable patterns. And this focus on the mundane, the repetitive, the slightly tedious aspects of managing a celestial family is precisely why this particular angle of Greek mythology is perfect for helping you wind down. We haven't focused on the thrilling battles, the passionate affairs, the tragic downfalls, or the monstrous foes. Instead, we've dwelled on the spreadsheet's imaginary. Of course, the scheduling conflicts, the awkward introductions, the endless record-keeping, and the predictable nature of Zeus's actions. There's a profound calm in realizing that even the king of the gods, ruler of the cosmos, had to deal with things that, from a certain perspective, resemble mundane tasks. Managing relationships, keeping track of family members, dealing with the logistics of travel and communication. Responding to requests, these are activities that, when stripped of their divine context, feel surprisingly ordinary. And it is in that ordinariness, that lack of constant divine fireworks, that we find our path to sleep. A mainstream historical fact that gently reinforces this is that ancient Greek society, like all human societies, relied on order, structure, and systems to function. While their gods were powerful and unpredictable, the myths often reflected human concerns about lineage, status, duty, and consequence. The boring aspects of Zeus's family management we've discussed are, in a way, divine echoes of human organizational challenges, making them relatable in their tediousness. Think about the mental state required for sleep. You need to quiet the racing thoughts, dampen the excitement, release the tension. Focusing on the dramatic, the exciting, the dangerous aspects of myths does the opposite. It stimulates the mind. But focusing on the endless list of names, the repetitive journeys, the slightly awkward family dynamics, the sheer volume of it all, that kind of focus encourages a gentle fading of attention, a soft blurring of details, leading naturally towards rest. A quirky tidbit to leave you with is the sheer number of place names in Greece that are linked in myth to one of Zeus's affairs or the birth of one of his children. Almost every region has a story. This proliferation of local myths, while adding complexity, also means that the evidence of Zeus's prolificacy is scattered geographically, rooted in countless specific, localized stories rather than one central, overwhelming narrative. It breaks the grand drama down into smaller, more manageable, and perhaps less exciting pieces spread across the landscape. Historians still argue about whether the widespread nature of myths linking local places to Zeus's progeny indicates a deliberate effort to create a pan-Hellenic identity by connecting diverse regions to a common divine ancestor, or if it simply reflects the natural process of myth diffusion and adaptation. Was it a conscious strategy or organic growth? This debate highlights the historical why behind the sprawling family tree. But for our purposes, the sheer spread of these stories just adds to the feeling of a vast, but perhaps thinly stretched, network of divine connection. So, as we close this chapter on the boring side of Zeus's remarkable family tree, let the images settle softly in your mind. Not the dramatic transformations or the divine confrontations, but the quiet rustle of celestial paperwork, the long and repetitive journeys, the effort of remembering countless names and faces, the awkward pauses at divine family gatherings, and the sheer, undeniable predictability of it all. There are no more twists or turns in this particular historical narrative tonight. Just the gentle, steady weight of historical detail. Predictable and calm? Let that weight settle over you, heavy and soothing. The names, the places, the logistics, all gently fading now, dissolving into the quiet element. The great, sprawling family tree of Zeus stretches out into the darkness of history, Its countless branches, once seemingly so dramatic, now appearing simply as lines on a cosmic chart, fading into the distance. The hustle of divine administration quiets. The echoes of awkward conversations dim. The memory of repetitive journeys softens like dust settling on ancient scrolls. All the complexity, all the numbers, all the distinctions, they are just quiet facts now, drifting away like leaves on a gentle breeze. There is nothing left to track, nothing left to remember, nothing left to manage. The immense family tree is just a quiet shape in the historical twilight, no longer demanding attention. Your own thoughts are slowing now, following the fading light of the myths. Peaceful. Still, letting the last vestiges of divine logistics float away, drifting, drifting into the calm, quiet space where only sleep remains.